Chapter 3. The present life is always of considerable interest to the pre-clear. In the first place, he is continuing to live in the environment and society, usually in which he's being audited. He must still face situations which the auditor will discover. The dramatis personae of this period is, to some extent, still living, or their artifacts are yet in plain view. In the second place, the pre-clear is still connected to these incidents by the identifying label of his present life name, and he is continually called by this label and has it confused with himself. In the third place, these facsimiles have not been invalidated by the shock of a death and the helpful hands of the Between Lives crew, and so are normally visible. Fourthly, in this life we have the combination of the current genetic being and the current theta being, and their struggle to even the harsh roadway of living and their divergence of goals. Present life, or any life that comes to view, should be to some extent cleared up for the pre-clear. Lives are, to some degree, units in themselves. This is caused by the fact that each life, while the pre-clear has been with body, is lived with a different basic team. The genetic being carries on through the evolutionary line parallel with the protoplasmic line, generation to generation, usually on the same planet, in this case Earth. The theta being comes into line from various quarters and each time usually enters an entirely different GE line. Any one life then is lived with a different GE. The pre-clear is always and always was and always will be the theta being, but the theta being has, life to life, a different GE. The character and quality of the messed body then is different in each lifetime. The past of the messed body in each lifetime is different from the viewpoint of the theta being. Thus the theta being has variation of experience which is not always life to life the same pattern. Thus, when lives come to view, they should be explored and audited as above. A few hours spent in this can materially assist a recovery. The present life is important out of proportion to the small fraction of total age of the theta being. The auditor will find himself in most cases compelled to spend many hours upon it, but he should not audit any heavy incidents in the present lifetime. These have basics which reduce much more swiftly, and these basics are always earlier by many ages. The time spent on the present life earlier in Dianetics was very great. It required scores or hundreds of hours of auditing to achieve optimum results, and then only with great cunning could the auditor achieve his goal. Swifter techniques made present life much easier to audit, cut down the time required, and increased the results. But the same results can be achieved much more swiftly, with much less skill and cunning, when one audits whole track, meaning the track of the theta being. Just as medical science has accepted prenatal experience according to their best heralds, the popular magazines such as Coronet and Reader's Digest, prenatals fade into the obscurity of curiosa in Dianetics. Great as the results were, which occurred when one audited prenatals, results in the same time are now so incomparably greater in auditing the whole track, or even in using Technique 80, that one need know very little about prenatals. In the first place, it's been discovered that prenatals happen to the GE, not the theta being. These recordings are so phonograph record-like because they are wholly in the somatic mind, the GE. They deeply affect the current messed body structure in many ways, but this structure can be otherwise repaired. The genetic entity apparently enters the protoplasm line some 2 days or a week prior to conception. There is some evidence that the GE is actually double, one entering on the sperm side, one entering on the ovum side. If the matter was still important, some time could be spent determining this, for the GE answers dually in present time. The GE continues as the guiding genius throughout prenatal life, building, regulating the heartbeat, and attending to complex structural matters. It records every perception present, asleep or awake, conscious or unconscious, in knockout or drugged sense, to the number of the about 50 perceptions at present. Just as the doctor quite often hears a baby in the womb cry, just as he can hear its heartbeat with his stethoscope, so can the child hear what is occurring outside his mother. This is a very important datum from the standpoint of preventative Dianetics, for by knowing it, one could easily forecast the health and mental poise of a child after birth by making certain that it has a good prenatal experience. Psychotics often dramatize, reenact, these prenatal engrams, and a trip through a sanitarium will show an auditor many prenatals in full play, running off flight records, ending and starting again endlessly. Here is the list of prenatals. They can be any combination of action known to the business of living, but these are the common ones. All incidents in any environment are prone to be repeated. Thus, these incidents commonly appear in long chains, many incidents in each incident much the same as the last. To audit the chain, one should get the basic on that chain. Coicious chain, father. Coicious chain, lover. Constipation chain. Ordinary bowel chain. Douche chain. Sickness chain, mother's illness. Sickness chain, another member of the family's illness. Work chain, mother's heavy activities at work. Exercise chain, mother's activity in sports or calisthenics. Morning sickness chain, contraceptive chain, fight chain, family quarrels. Fight chain, outside the home. High blood pressure chain, mother's high blood pressure. Doctor examination chain, punching mother. Alcoholic chain, mother's drinking. Accident chain, mother's falls and bumps. Attempted abortion, surgical. Attempted abortion, douche. Attempted abortion by pressure. Attempted abortion by exercise or jumping. Cough chain, mother's coughing. Cough chain, other members of the family. Hiccup chain, masturbation chain, mother's masturbation. Crying chain, mother's crying. Pre-sperm recordings are quite ordinary. The sperm sequence itself is worthy of note, for it's a race of which the sperm is very conscious. His travails in reaching the ovum are many. There is a visio, which is quite standard, of the race. There is quite often a light. A spark in this sequence. The sperm reaches the ovum and merges. This merging is another incident. Conception! Pre-ovum sequences are on record but are not common. The rolling of the ovum down the tube is commonly recorded. Conception and the impulses generated answer the conditions for one type of cancer, embryonic. Mitosis is an incident. Cellular division, once or many times, is on common record. Mitosis answers the conditions for the other type of cancer, malignant cell. Cancer has been eradicated by auditing out conception and mitosis. The theta being, apparently, joins the track immediately prior to birth. Its sequence for itself is death, between lives, birth, all in a few minutes according to some findings, a sequence which is quite aberrative. The theta being's joining is called the starter. The theta being sometimes fights away another theta being, sometimes considers this an overt act. You may audit an entire prenatal bank without getting as much rise in the preclear's tone as auditing one starter for the theta being. After all, is the preclear. Birth is a very aberrative affair, and a difficult or complicated birth can aberrate the entire lifetime of the messed body. But this means that birth should be without conversation, in a darkened and quiet room, with high humidity and without drafts. Not that you should audit births. In other words, one should know how aberrative birth is, but one should not audit birth as a practice. One facsimile one has as many as 80,000 births on it as locks. Birth presents itself to be audited much of the time because mother, complaining of how difficult the preclear's birth was, makes it into an overt act. This overt act had birth as a motivator. Thus preclears are anxious to have their birth engram audited. Infant and childhood illness are important because in them the theta being loses much of the control of the body. The incidents of degradation which precede these, however, are a more important target for the auditor. Most preclears are stuck somewhere on the present life track. The E-meter will tell the auditor where, if the auditor asks in terms of years. It is rarely where the preclear thinks it is. Operations, accidents, illnesses are all more or less routine. The auditor should take them as he is given them by the E-meter, or symbols, or both, but he should not audit them as such unless he is strongly forced to do so. The incidents on which they depend are so much earlier, so much more aberrative. For every motivator in the present life, there is an overt or a DED. Thus it behooves the auditor to pay much more attention to using Technique 80 than it does to find new and strange present life incidents to audit. It should not require more than a score of hours to clean up the present life until heavy incidents in the past can be audited. This is true for the neurotic and relatively sane only. It is not true for the psychotics. For them, it may be necessary to audit prenatals or use other techniques, and to spend perhaps hundreds of hours of ARC processing to make them entirely sane and stable. Present life incidents, by test, cannot quickly resolve any case. Audit present life only until one can audit theta line material with safety.